Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Developing a Data Management Plan for Your Data, an introduction to MU Library's Research Data Management Service. My name is Fran Callaghan, and I'm the Research Data Management Librarian, or the RDM Librarian at Maynooth University Library, and I have been since March 2022. And upon starting in the role, one of my main priorities was to design and deliver a research data management service for the research community in Maynooth University. And that's what I'm going to be speaking about today in conjunction with data management planning, what it is and how you might go about creating a data management plan for your data. So what is a data management plan? A data management plan is a formal statement describing how research data will be managed and documented throughout a research project, and the terms regarding the subsequent deposit of the data with a data repository for long-term management and preservation. What that means in a nutshell is a DMP describes how you will look after your data throughout the project and beyond through the end of the project. Typically, they're between 2 and 8 pages in length. I say typically, but I've yet to see a typical data management plan. They differ greatly depending on the stage of the project, the discipline of the project, and the scope of the project. But typically, 2 pages is a very succinct, tight data management plan, and it can go to 8 pages. They can go further, particularly if you're looking at the Horizon Europe templates for which include a lot of fair data requirements, and they can go to 16, 20 pages. But that's not typical. They're arranged in sections, often reflecting funder requirements. So if you have funder requirements, you'll see that a data management plan, ideally, particularly if it's designed with funder requirements and the requirement for funder requirements, if that makes sense, in mind, it will typically be arranged in sections, that each section referring to a particular requirement of the funder. It's a living document that can and should be updated throughout the project lifecycle. So really, your data management plan is done when your research project is done and not before then. And although it's a funder requirement, and it's nearly a funder requirement of nearly all funders now at this stage, I would rather it be seen as a useful guide throughout the research project, and particularly a guide to avoid pitfalls. Why would you create a data management plan? Well, anyone who's managed a research project will know that it's kind of like keeping spinning plates in the air. And amidst the organized chaos, your data can often be the first casualty of that chaos, and it can be lost and it can be inaccessible. So to keep your data safe, creating data can be very expensive in terms of monetary, time, human resources, and actually recreating data sets isn't always that straightforward, and in many cases it's entirely impossible. Interviewees may not participate again, may not wish to be interviewed again. Physical conditions can change. So data sets in many regards are unique and can't be recreated, or if they can be recreated, are expensive to recreate. To avoid drowning in the not relevant stuff, I originally said the irrelevant stuff, but of course none of your research data is irrelevant, but at different times you may need to access specific parts of the data. And even your own data sets can be difficult to navigate after a number of months. If you've got folders and files and so on, you can't find your way around your own data set. So a data management plan can help you traverse and navigate your own data set as well as other people's data sets. To identify and mitigate potential shortfalls, and I highlight here mitigate because a data management plan should be highlighting potential roadblocks, stumbling blocks, places where you may need to. So if you can imagine in 12 months time, you know you're going to need a particular piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment will require a trained operator. So you know then that you have, you're going to build in budget, you're going to build in time in 12 to 18 months time to hire in an operator for that piece of machine. It's critical you do that at the data management planning stage, because it's now where you can go to a funder and say, look, we may require additional funds for this, or it's at this point where your budget is essentially untouched, and you can then start saying, okay, we need to make a provision for events that are going to happen at 12 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line. To allow for sharing and reuse where appropriate after the project is complete. This is particularly chimes with funder requirements. Funders know that data is expensive to create, and their preference would be for you to reuse it if at all possible. But if you are going to create data, they know they're the ones footing the bill for that data creation. So what they want to see is a willingness and a preparation on your part to share and make that data reusable. If you are going to share your data, what you want to do is make sure that you're properly cited and referenced for sharing that data, in the same way that you would be properly cited and referenced for sharing your findings in a publication. And to avoid accusations of bad science. So the best example I can think of here is the ClimateGate scandal, which is now over 10 years old. But in that scandal, the University of East Anglia, which was conducting quite a lot of science in the area of climate change and climate science, came up with some fairly nasty findings, which we're all fairly familiar with now. However, some vested interests that were kind of unhappy with some of the results hacked into the University of East Anglia servers and very selectively released emails, communications, and result sets that seemed in isolation to contradict the findings. Thankfully, what the University of East Anglia was able to do, because they had good data management practices, was to share their data sets and their data management plans with other research performing organizations operating in the area of climate science, and they were able to recreate and verify those results. So research integrity and transparency is becoming a huge deal in research now. So this is how you can help to avoid any accusations of bad science and make sure your research integrity piece is complete. And then finally, perhaps the worst reason to create a data management plan, but the reason that for maybe 95% of my consultations is because your funder told you to create a data management plan. So how you might go about it, involve as many team members as possible. Often one person will be tasked with creating the data management plan, and that's fine. But every member of the team is probably going to create data or be responsible for creating data and managing data at some point in the research life cycle. So although you may be tasked with writing the data management plan, it doesn't mean you are the data manager. Consult your funder requirements if you have funder requirements. In terms of the Irish kind of landscape, there is funder requirements for Horizon Europe. So if you're Horizon funded, there are specific Horizon Europe requirements. If you're Health Research Board funded, there are HRB requirements. And if you're the Science Foundation Ireland or Irish Research Council, so that's SFI IRC, if you're SFI IRC funded, they don't have specific requirements of their own, but they have adopted the Science Europe templates. So you can see the Science Europe requirements are here. So that's very useful, because although the requirements will help almost like codify what it is you're trying to achieve in your data management plan. And we'll see that in a little while. And use a tool like a DMP tool or DMP Online to help you drafting the data management plan. There's nothing more intimidating than staring at a blank Word document on screen and saying, okay, so how do I start writing a data management plan? These will help to kind of demystify and take that kind of that blankness away from you. And we'll see, I will demonstrate what DMP Online looks like in a little while. And then finally, use the Maynooth University Library RDM service. Contact me and we can go through that. This is what this is an overview of the service. There's kind of two parts to the service currently. Step one is a consultation. It's a one-to-one consultation. So whilst I'm here talking in a kind of almost like a classroom environment to many people, the actual service itself is more tailored towards individuals. So once somebody will contact me and we set up a consultation, here's some of the things that we'll talk about for that consultation. and talk about the project proposal and the background of the researcher, talk a little bit about what it is that the research project proposes, and talk a little bit about the subject or discipline that the researcher is working in. Whilst I won't have subject or disciplinary knowledge, it can still be useful to know in terms of what metadata standards we may be employing, what controlled vocabularies may be in play, and what subject repositories may be available for you to use as both as a depositor of your data set once you're finished, but also as a consumer. So you may be able to look at subject repositories as a source for your data sets, as well as a target for your data sets. We'll just discuss the potential for data creation as against the potential for reusing. Again, the funders would be happier to see you reusing data. It's cheaper. And if possible, and it's not always possible, but if possible, if we can identify an initial table of data sets. And this is really just like pen and pad kind of stuff where you can kind of talk about, okay, well, you're talking about interviews. So you're going to do so many interviews, or you propose to do 15 interviews. Okay, so that's that. They're going to be an hour long. You're going to transcribe them. So you're going to transcribe them into text. So you can just kind of go, okay, 15 by interviews, 15 by transcribed interviews in text format, that kind of thing. It just helps to encapsulate the proposed data sets in a tabular format. Outline the funder requirements. Again, if you have funder requirements, it helps to map individual questions. So then you're answering individual questions rather than just discussing this kind of narrative or writing this document. Demystify the funder language. Funders will often use terminology that doesn't resonate very well with researchers, particularly around stuff like what metadata standards will you use. It's always one that comes back time and time again is what did they mean by what metadata standards will I use. So we'll talk about what the individual questions are and how you might go about answering those. And then finally, we'll introduce DMP Online. So the last step in step one, if you like, is to introduce DMP Online. I'm just going to have a quick look at what DMP Online can do for you now. Here's DMP Online. It's provided by the Digital Curation Centre in the UK, the DCC, in other words. And it was a JISC funded project, so it is very UK centric. That said, you're free to use it. You're free to create an account, and it works. It's completely open. You will need to create an account because you will have a kind of a private work area when you sign in. And creating an account can be a bit off-putting for non-UK researchers because it does ask you to select your RPO from a list, but you can override that and say my research performing organization or my organization isn't listed, and you can create an account. I have an account maybe 7 years at this stage. This is what my dashboard looks like. As you can see, it's basically full of test plans and workshop plans from doing these kind of demonstrations. So there's nothing very interesting in my dashboard. Obviously, the first time you sign on, your dashboard will be empty. Main thing is you have down the bottom, you have the button that says create plan. When you go to create a new plan, it does ask you for some headline information. This is a once-off thing, you know what I mean? It's just kind of headline information about your project. So what research project are you planning? This is basically just saying, give this DMP a name. Over on the right-hand side here, you'll see there's a little checkbox for mock project for testing, practice, or educational purposes. You see on the previous screen, all of my plans are marked as mock projects. If you are going into DMP Online, they do ask you if you're just playing around or creating a plan just for the sake of having a look at it or testing or whatever, please mark them as mock projects because they aren't included in the daily kind of cleanup and backup cycle of live projects. Obviously, live projects, live DMPs are backed up. Like the kind of nonsense that I have won't be backed up. Select the primary research organization. This is essentially your university, your organization, your employer, whoever it happens to be. I'm guessing for the vast majority of people on this call, that's going to be Maynooth University. As you start typing Maynooth University, it will essentially fail and say, I can't find that organization. In that case, there's no problem at all. What you tick, instead of start trying to type it in, you put in no research organization listed with this plan, or my research organization is not listed. All that means, it's not a problem. All it means is that Maynooth University itself has no specific requirements of its own. There's nothing that it wants seen to or that it wants addressed in your data management plan. The third one, though, can be key, particularly if you are writing a DMP with a funder requirement in mind, and that is to select the primary funding organization. Again, as you start typing in here, it will auto-complete. And again, as I said, Horizon Europe has a template. The Health Research Board has a template, and Science Europe has a template which covers SFI and IRC. So you will choose your funding organization here. And what that does is it helps DMP Online to tailor the rest of the experience, the rest of the process to those specific requirements that your funder are looking for. So the questions your funder want answered, and key to that is how you may go about answering those questions. In my example, in this example here, I've chosen Science Europe template. Now, if you looked at the Science Europe recommendations, it's in a document form and it's quite narrative and a little rambling and so on. But if you were to boil it all down, you could see in the document that it boils down to 6 thematic areas. And in each of those thematic areas, it asks you a number of specific questions. So we can see our 6 thematic areas here. And in each of those thematic areas, we can see 0 of 2, 0 of 3, 0 of 4, etc. And that means that at the moment, we have answered 0 of 2 questions in that thematic area, in terms of data description and collection, and so on down through the other 5 areas. And you can see up above that slightly, you see 0 of 15. And what that means at this point, we have answered 0 of 15 questions. So it's just a matter, and I say just a matter, it's just a matter of answering 15 questions and you will have a data management plan at the end. In order to answer those questions, you will go over to the right-hand side and click on the Expand tab. This is what the questions look like. So once you get into the nitty-gritty of DMP Online, you'll see not only are you given very specific questions, you're also given a simple enough text editor in order to provide your answer, and a button so that you can save your answer once you've provided it. What's key on this screen here is over on the right-hand side, though, and that's the guidance and comments. And this is guidance from the Digital Curation Centre bearing in mind what your funder requirements are. So this is basically saying, I can help you answer those questions that Science Europe wants answered, and this is the kind of stuff that they are looking for. If you expand it, you'll see that the guidance is actually quite substantial here. And given what it's doing at this point is asking you a very targeted, simple but targeted question, and giving you quite a lot of advice and support and guidance on how you would go about answering that question. So really, this has completely demystified that and taken away that blank document from you and just said, here's a simple question, here's how you may go about answering it. And once you do that, and once you consult with your team and you provide the answer in depth, you'll see that once you click on save, it will say answered just now by Fran Callaghan. And actually, if you went into this plan, because it's days old at this stage, it will say answered on the 25th or the 21st of October by Fran Callaghan. So there's a complete audit trail of changes, and you'll see who changed what and who answered each question in your team. Once you've given proper consideration and cogent answers to all of your questions, there's a couple of things you can do. You can share the plan with members of your team. You can share the plan with anyone who has an account in DMP Online, or you can download the completed plan. Notice there's no button here to finish or end or anything like that, because again, as I said at the start, the data management plan should be seen as a living document. So as long as your project is active, your data management plan is active. So there is no end button. But at any point, once you're happy with it, and if you need to provide it to a PI, or you need to provide it to a university or your employer, or crucially, if you need to provide it to your funder, you can download and export it here, and it will provide you a PDF. It's at that point then, if you have your DMP and you've used DMP Online, you've answered all the questions and you've exported the PDF, and now you've got 2, 3, 4 pages of a data management plan, is you can then go back to step 2 in the RDM service, and that's a DMP review. And that's basically submitting it to me and asking me to review the plan. Again, as I say, experiment design, anything like that, I don't have the domain knowledge of your fields to be able to tell you that your methodology is wrong. What I'm looking for is, have you given proper, cogent answers to all of the questions? Crucially, if there's funder requirements, we will look to see if funder requirements have been met, and have you followed a template. So if you're creating a data management plan for the purposes of funder requirements, I would encourage you to use a template where it's available, because what it does, I've seen so many data management plans that essentially answer all the funder requirements, but in a very rambling narrative way that don't necessarily translate to the heading. So if a funder is asking for a plan, they may send it out for review, which is basically asking somebody to say, no, does this make sense? And what they'll want is kind of go, okay, well, Science Europe have 15 questions. Have you answered 15 questions well? Have you answered them thoroughly? So if you can stick to a template, I would encourage you to do that. Make sure every question has a cogent answer, and that's just to avoid situations where you've got NA and stuff like that. That doesn't wash well. They want to see, have you thought about it? So if a question is genuinely not applicable, say that, because of ethics, that you're not using sensitive personal data, so ethics is not a consideration for this project. And then specific versus woolly answers. This just refers to stuff like, a lot of people will say, oh, we will keep the data sets indefinitely. And you kind of go, really? Like, how do you propose to keep data sets indefinitely? Why, like, if you want to keep them for 5 years, you can say, okay, I can commission university resources for 5 years. That's going to cost X amount of money. And after that, I make no, claims for the data. And then finally, just if there's any kind of finessing the language, and that's really just using language that funders will like to hear, and that's particularly using open data format. So not just like, oh, I will share my data and I will share my publications. It's like using open language, using open file formats. So rather than using .docs, use .docx's or .txt's and that kind of thing. And then finally, some helpful tips. Be succinct. Remember, it's about 2 or 3 pages. It's a good basic data management plan. Be realistic. Again, don't say you're going to keep data indefinitely. Be realistic about what you're saying. Preempt problems and identify solutions. Use tables for data-heavy sections. So if you're particularly working in STEM where you're creating a lot of outputs from machines, use tables to succinctly capture those data sets. Explain non-applicable. Again, just not ignoring questions or saying NA. Explain why it's not applicable. Use open formats where possible. Follow funder templates if provided. Again, it makes peer reviewing of the data sets a whole lot easier, of the data management plans a whole lot easier rather. And then finally, check out exemplar data management plans, and you can see just what a data management plan would look like in your area, and kind of go, okay, so now I've got a sense of it. It's 4 pages long, and this is the kind of thing that they're asking for. So the Digital Creation Centre have picked what they see as the exemplar data management plans and collated them together. And at that point, I'm going to stop talking then and open the floor to questions.